Hello there, and welcome to Dreamy Science. I'm so glad you're here. Maybe today felt a little heavy, or maybe small thoughts kept drifting through your mind like quiet herds across a winter plain. Either way, you found a soft place to rest. Tonight, we wander back into a world shaped by ice and silence, where mammoths moved like slow mountains across frozen earth, their footsteps pressed softly into snow, their breath rising like pale clouds into the long, ancient dusk. We're not here to learn quickly or remember anything at all, only to drift with them, to feel the calm weight of deep time, and to let the hush of the ice age settle over your thoughts. If these gentle journeys help you unwind, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps more quiet minds find their way here, one sleepy soul at a time. Now, settle in, let your breath loosen, and drift with me into the quiet world of mammoths. The first light spread over the Ice Age plain, pale and quiet. Mammoths moved through it like drifting shadows. Morning unfolded slowly across the tundra, revealing curves of distant hills and the faint shimmer of frost that had settled during the long night. The air was so still, it felt almost held, as though the world itself were not quite awake yet. Each step the mammoths took seemed to stir a little more light into existence, their massive shapes guiding the day forward without urgency. Their breath mingled with the weak sunlight, rising in soft spirals that dissolved into the cold like small offerings to the dawn. Around them, the land stretched in muted whites and blues, every contour softened beneath layers of snow, every sound wrapped in the hush of winter. The earth held memories of countless mornings like this, quiet beginnings in a time when life moved at a patient rhythm, shaped not by clocks, but by cold and instinct. The mammoths walked with the ease of creatures built for frost, their wool catching the faint glow, their tusks glinting like curved pieces of the sky. Nothing hurried them. Nothing asked for more than what they already gave. Their path wound gently across the plain, leaving deep rounded impressions in the snow that would remain long after they passed, slow signatures of presence in a world that asked only for steady movement. As the horizon brightened, the mammoths continued forward, not toward a destination, but simply with it, part of a morning that stretched out like breath, unbroken, calm, and ancient. Warm clouds rose from their trunks, dissolving gently into the blue-white air. Each breath felt like a soft signal of life in a frozen world. The mist curled upward in slow spirals, shimmering faintly as sunlight filtered through the icy haze. In the frigid stillness of the steppe, these warm breaths were among the few moving things, drifting upward like pale ghosts of warmth against the vast cold. Each exhale told a quiet story of survival, of steady hearts beating beneath wool, of bodies shaped by ages of frost and wind. The mammoths breathed in unison sometimes, great synchronized clouds rising and fading as though the entire herd shared a single ancient rhythm. Around them, the air crackled faintly with cold, the kind that settled deep into the land and waited. Snowflakes hovered in the calm, caught in the warmth of rising breath before melting into the fur that blanketed their immense forms. The scent of frozen grass drifted faintly beneath the snow, carried on the slightest breeze. Calves watched the breath of their elders with sleepy eyes, mimicking the slow inhale and exhale as though learning the art of being alive in winter's grip. Each breath was a reminder that warmth existed even here, hidden beneath layers of wool and silence. And as they moved forward, the trail behind them filled with the faint fog of breath that lingered for a moment before dissolving again, like a soft chorus fading into the endless cold. Snowflakes clung to their thick wool, sparkling like tiny frozen stars. The mammoths continued without disturbing the hush. Their fur, long and tangled, caught the snow as naturally as the branches of winter trees, holding each delicate flake until it melted or drifted away. Light shifted across their coats, turning the frost into constellations that shimmered with every slow step. The mammoths did not seem to notice. The snow was part of them, as familiar as breath and bone. In the quiet morning, each flake added to the soft palette of the tundra, brightening the dark strands of their wool with hints of white and silver. Calves walked close to their mothers, brushing against them and releasing small showers of snow that sparkled briefly before settling on the ground. The breeze carried new flakes from distant clouds, placing them gently upon the herd as if crowning them with the cold's quiet blessing. The land around them remained still, respectful of their passage. Snow gathered along their backs and shoulders, forming thin ridges that traced the shape of their massive forms. As they moved, these ridges broke apart and drifted downward, joining the unbroken whiteness beneath their feet. With each slow stride, snowflakes continued their delicate descent, settling against ancient fur warmed by living breath, turning the mammoths into walking landscapes, winter moving through winter. Their steps landed with slow certainty. The earth trembled in a deep, almost comforting rhythm. Beneath layers of packed snow, the ground absorbed the weight of each stride, sending subtle vibrations into the cold air. It was a sound that belonged only to creatures of great size, living in a vast, silent world, a low, steady pulse that marked their presence across the tundra. The footsteps echoed through the frozen plain like a heartbeat too slow to disturb sleep, each thud softened by snow but felt through the bones of the land. Calves walked beside their elders, their smaller feet sinking more lightly, leaving a trail that overlapped with larger prints. The herd's movements blended into one long, winding path stamped gently into the snow. The ground seemed to welcome their weight, the ancient earth and ancient animals sharing a deep familiarity, shaped across countless seasons. Around them, the horizon stretched wide and empty, waiting for nothing, offering only space. Yet the mammoths filled that space with a quiet energy, not urgency, but presence. Their footsteps seemed to say, "We are here. We have always been here. We move because the world moves with us." Even the wind hushed as their feet pressed down, as though listening for the next slow pulse. And as they continued onward, their deep rhythmic steps carried the story of their journey across the sleeping land. Their long tusks traced graceful arcs through the chilled air. Light touched them with faint gold. Each curve held years of growth, spiraling outward like frozen crescents shaped by time itself. The tusks moved with a delicate steadiness that belied their immense weight, guided by the mammoth's slow and fluid motions. When the herd turned, the ivory glinted softly, catching the pale sun in warm tones that contrasted with the cold world around them. Snow brushed against the smooth surfaces, leaving faint trails that drifted away on the breeze. Calves followed the arc of their elders' tusks with wide, curious eyes, learning how these long extensions spoke a language of gentle pushes, quiet signals, and slow guiding gestures. The air hummed with soft echoes as tusks touched the ground or brushed past hanging frost. Their shapes made the mammoths appear like walking monuments, each one carrying the elegant sweep of history in ivory form. The curves guided movement, carved paths through snow, and reminded the world of the strength hidden beneath stillness. And as they drifted onward, the tusks continued to catch the light, turning cold air warm for a heartbeat, then fading back into soft winter glow. The mammoths traveled together as though sharing a single breath. Their pace remained steady, unhurried. The shape of the herd shifted subtly as they moved, each mammoth adjusting its position in quiet awareness of the others. Calves tucked safely into the center, adults forming a wide living circle around them, all flowing together like a slow-moving river of wool and warmth. The air around them vibrated faintly with their rumbling communication, low, melodic tones that drifted through the cold like ancient songs. Each sound was felt as much as heard, a deep vibration carried from one massive body to the next. Snow drifted across their path, but they parted it effortlessly, their formation tightening and loosening in gentle waves. The landscape seemed built for their movement, broad open plains, soft rising hills, valleys carved by ice and time. Their unity created a sense of calm that spread through the frozen world, as if even the horizon listened to the rhythm of their steps. Together, they crossed the tundra, not with urgency, but with trust. Trust in one another, in the path beneath them, in the instinct that guided their slow and ancient journey. Their coats layered warmth against the endless cold. Every strand carried the memory of storms. Thick, dark wool rippled along their bodies as they moved, heavy enough to guard against the deepest frost, yet soft enough to shift with the wind. Snow settled into the outer layers without ever reaching the warm refuge beneath. Their fur held scents of earth, grass, and distant seasons, a tapestry of survival woven into every fiber. Calves pressed close to the flanks of adults, feeling the radiating heat that lived beneath the wool, like an ember kept safe in winter's hand. The mammoths' coats held stories etched by weather, ice crusted from storms long past, fragments of dried grasses caught from warmer months, hints of mud from river crossings frozen in time. Their wool carried them through every change in the land, absorbing the cold so their bodies didn't have to. As wind brushed across them, their coats swayed gently, creating a soft whisper that rose and fell with their movement. The world around them remained harsh, stark, and pale, but their wool glowed with quiet resilience, a living warmth, wrapped in layers of ancient memory. A young mammoth walked beneath the shadow of towering legs. Its small steps echoed the herd's slow rhythm. The calf stayed close to its mother, brushing her side with its trunk whenever uncertainty drifted into its path. Snow clung to its shorter fur, forming tiny patches of white that softened its round shape. The calf's breath puffed out in delicate clouds, trying to mimic the deep exhalations of the adults around it. Each new step was a lesson: how to move through snow, how to listen for low rumbles, how to find comfort in the warmth of the herd's presence. The towering figures that surrounded the calf moved like calm mountains, their slow, sure pace offering guidance without words. Every so often, the mother reached her trunk back to touch her calf, a gesture of reassurance that traveled through the cold like a quiet promise. The calf tilted its head to follow the movement of others, learning to read subtle shifts in the herd's formation. Under the protective arch of legs and long wool, the young mammoth discovered the shape of safety, and as they progressed, its small steps grew more confident, merging seamlessly into the steady rhythm of the family moving through winter's vast silence. Under their weight, ice groaned softly. Cracks formed like quiet songs beneath their feet. The frozen river stretched wide beneath them, a glittering sheet of pale blue that reflected the muted sky. The mammoths stepped carefully, sensing the subtle vibrations through the thick pads of their feet. Each step pressed down with tremendous force, yet the cracks that spread beneath them were gentle, almost melodic, thin silver lines growing in slow, branching patterns. The herd crossed in a careful line, following the path chosen by the matriarch, whose instincts had been shaped by countless winters. The sound of shifting ice echoed softly between the riverbanks, bouncing off frozen cliffs and drifting into the cold air. Snow dusted the surface of the ice, making it appear like frosted glass beneath their massive forms. Calves walked with heightened caution, watching the adults' feet and learning where to place their own. As they moved, the ice held firm, bearing their weight with ancient strength. Beyond the river, frost-covered grasses waited beneath light snow, promising a small meal once the crossing was done. The herd stepped off the ice and onto solid ground once more, leaving behind only faint lines that spread across the river's surface like the memory of their passage. They moved toward distances that seemed never to end. Their silhouettes became part of the land itself. The horizon stretched out in a pale, endless sweep of white and soft blue, blending sky and snow into a single quiet expanse. As the mammoths walked, their shapes shifted in and out of the light, sometimes crisp against the brightness, sometimes softened into near invisibility. The world felt immense, yet the herd moved through it with the calm certainty of creatures who belonged to every inch of it. Their tusks rose like pale arcs against the distant glow, their wool catching hints of gold from the fading sun. The farther they traveled, the more the land opened, revealing low hills shaped by ancient ice and valleys where the wind gathered in soft currents. Each step seemed to carry them deeper into the heart of winter, into a place where time stretched wide and slow. The horizon drifted with them, always a little farther, always quiet, always waiting. As night approached, the mammoths continued on, their bodies gently swaying with the rhythm of the land, becoming part of its vastness, part of its stillness, part of its endless, dreamlike reach. Low rumbles drifted across the frozen landscape. The air carried them farther than sight could reach. The calls resonated like distant thunder muffled by snow, spreading through open valleys and rolling gently across the tundra. Each rumble held meaning, a greeting, a reassurance, a signal carried through the cold. The sound reached the edges of the herd and beyond, echoing off icy ridges and fading into pale silence. Calves listened closely, tilting their heads as the vibrations passed through the ground beneath them. The rumbles created invisible threads that connected the herd across long distances, guiding movement and offering comfort even when individuals drifted apart. The cold air sharpened the sound, allowing it to travel with astonishing clarity beneath the endless sky. These calls reminded the frozen world that life moved through it, slow, steady, ancient life shaped by wind and frost. And as the echoes faded, the land seemed to settle once more into its quiet watchfulness, holding the resonance of the mammoths' voices like a memory beneath the snow. The world held its breath around them. Even wind softened when they passed. The silence that surrounded the herd was thick and gentle, like a blanket drawn across the land. Snow absorbed every sound, leaving only the faint crunch of steps and the soft whisper of wool brushing against wool. Time seemed to slow under the weight of such quiet, each moment stretching open like a long exhale. The mammoths moved through the stillness as though they were part of it, their presence blending seamlessly with the muted tones of winter. The air felt hushed, as if the world watched them with quiet reverence. Occasionally, a distant crack of shifting ice or the soft rustle of a bird taking flight broke the silence, but even those small noises dissolved quickly. The herd continued forward, wrapped in the deep calm of a landscape where nothing hurried, nothing demanded motion. The silence became a companion, moving with them, filling the spaces between their breaths. Their trunks brushed away frost with gentle precision. Hidden grasses waded beneath the ice. The mammoths worked patiently, sweeping aside layers of snow and hardened crust with practiced motions. Beneath the white surface, tough blades of ancient tundra grass lay dormant, waiting for moments just like this. The cold air carried the earthy scent upward as the snow parted, a faint reminder of seasons that once brought greener landscapes. Calves watched their elders dig, mimicking the motions in small arcs that sometimes uncovered only ice, but still taught them the ancient ritual. The herd gathered slowly around each exposed patch, taking turns to feed in unspoken order. Their movements remained slow, respectful of the scarcity of winter. Snow gathered along their backs as they fed, but they paid it no mind. Each mouthful carried warmth, strength, and the soft continuity of survival. Above them, the sky stretched wide and pale, offering quiet approval. The grass beneath the frost had waited patiently, and now, in the gentle company of mammoths, it fulfilled its quiet purpose once more. Wind sculpted the plains into long, smooth waves. Mammoths blended into the moving white. The gusts carried fine snow in sweeping arcs, shaping the land as though it were soft clay beneath an invisible hand. Drifts rose and fell in gentle curves, mimicking the slow rise and fall of the herd's bodies as they moved. The wind wrapped around the mammoth's wool, tugging playfully at the long strands, but never disturbing their steady pace. Their silhouettes blurred at the edges, becoming part of the drifting snow, appearing and disappearing like ancient spirits moving through a world shaped from air and ice. The sound of the wind wove through their steps, a low constant hum that blended with the soft rustle of their coats. Calves leaned into the gusts, learning how to balance against the push of nature's rhythm. Even as the wind sculpted the plains, the mammoths left their own gentle marks, footprints, shadows, warmth lingering in the cold. The land changed continuously, shaped by forces both immense and tender, and the mammoths moved through it as though they had always belonged to its shifting waves. As the sun dropped, their shapes stretched long across the snow. Twilight wrapped itself around them. The fading light softened everything it touched, turning the frozen world into a canvas of blues and purples. Mammoth shadows reached far across the ground, elongated forms that swayed gently with each slow step. The sky deepened into dusk, and the edges of the world blurred as color drained into soft, muted shades. The mammoths moved as though floating between day and night, their wool catching the last remnants of sunlight like embers cooling in the cold. Calves stayed close, their small forms blending into the warmth of the adults as darkness gathered. The horizon glowed faintly with the final traces of daylight, a thin band of warmth slipping away. Above them, the first stars appeared, scattered across the darkening sky. Evening embraced the herd with quiet tenderness, ushering them deeper into the calm rhythms of the coming night. Their heavy bodies swayed softly with each step. The motion felt almost like breathing. The rhythm of their gait created a gentle rocking, as if the entire herd moved to the same slow, ancient pulse. Snow compressed beneath them in time with their sway, producing a soft, steady cadence that blended with the hush of the tundra. Calves followed behind, their smaller bodies mimicking the motion, learning the balance and grace required to move across such vast frozen ground. The mammoth's massive forms shifted with practiced ease, muscles rolling beneath thick layers of warmth. Each step carried them forward without urgency, guided by instinct older than memory. The land seemed to move with them, swaying in quiet companionship beneath the pale sky, their breathing synchronized with their motion, creating a peaceful harmony of inhalations and exhalations drifting into the cold air. The rhythm soothed even the stillness around them, as if the world attuned itself to their slow, steady pace. In this gentle motion, the mammoths found continuity, comfort, and the effortless ease of being exactly where they belonged. Ice crystals formed delicate lattices along their backs. They sparkled as though woven from quiet stars. The frost settled gently onto their wool, catching the afternoon light in tiny prisms that shimmered with each slow movement. The mammoths walked as though unaware of the beauty gathering on their bodies, carrying the glittering frost with natural grace. The cold air turned the crystals rigid, preserving them in intricate patterns that traced the contours of their massive frames. Calves pressed close, brushing against the adults and sending tiny showers of frost drifting to the ground. The snow beneath their feet reflected the sparkling light, turning the tundra into a landscape of shimmering stillness. As the mammoths moved, the frost shifted and reformed, always changing yet always present, a quiet testament to the cold. Even the air around them seemed brighter, filled with scattered stars that clung not to the sky, but to wool warmed by life beneath ancient ice. Their trunks traced slow circles in the snow. Beneath each patch, the earth offered what little it could. The mammoths moved carefully, sweeping their trunks in patient arcs that revealed small pockets of frozen grass and brittle stems hiding beneath the winter crust. The cold air filled with the soft sound of snow being brushed aside, a gentle sweep that echoed faintly across the open land. Calves watched intently, practicing the same circular motions even when nothing lay beneath the snow but ice. These small acts of searching connected them with generations past. Instincts passed quietly from one winter to the next. The herd gathered around each uncovered patch, taking slow, deliberate bites that warmed their bodies from within. The ground, though sparse, still held remnants of life, and the mammoths honored it by consuming only what they needed. Their trunks continued their slow, rhythmic search, carving shapes into the snow like temporary signatures of survival drawn across the frozen earth. A low rumble drifted in from somewhere unseen. Another answered, deep and steady. The sound traveled through the cold air like a soft wave spreading across the plains and echoing off distant hills. The mammoths paused briefly, lifting their heads to listen, their ears turning slightly to catch the vibrations. These calls carried meaning, reassurance, acknowledgement, the simple recognition of presence across distance. Calves pressed closer to the adults as the rumbles continued, feeling the faint tremor beneath their feet. The air held the sound for a long moment before releasing it into the vastness of the tundra. The herd resumed their movement, guided by the reassurance that came from knowing others were near. The calls acted like invisible threads, connecting mammoths that were out of sight but never out of reach. As the echoes faded, tranquility settled back into the land, the calm deepening with the lingering memory of their ancient voices. Each mammoth moved with awareness of the others. The circle held them all close. They walked in a formation shaped by instinct and trust, each step aligned with the quiet presence of the herd around them. Calves rested safely in the center, surrounded by adults whose massive bodies formed a living barrier against the cold and wind. The formation shifted gently as they traveled, expanding and contracting like a slow breath, always keeping the youngest protected. Low rumbles passed between them, soft signals that reassured and guided. Their closeness created a shared warmth that radiated outward, turning the cold air a little softer, the wind a little quieter. Even the land seemed to respect their unity, offering open paths and calm sky as they moved. The circle was more than protection. It was family, a bond woven through generations of survival. And as they traveled through the endless snow, the herd remained a single steady presence, safe, warm, and held within itself like a heartbeat in winter's vast quiet. At the front walked the oldest female, wise and slow. Her path was steady, shaped by memory. She moved with the quiet authority of seasons gathered across a lifetime. Storms survived, valleys crossed, rivers known by the subtle shift of their ice. Her steps were not rushed. They were placed with purpose, guided by instincts older than any living mammoth beside her. Snow clung to the fur along her back, outlining the gentle sway of her ancient frame as she led the herd toward distant hills. The others followed without question, trusting the unspoken understanding she carried within her, a map etched into her bones by experience. Calves watched her with wide eyes, sensing something calm and reliable in the way she moved. The matriarch paused at times, raising her trunk to feel the air or to listen for echoes carried across the frozen landscape. She read the world in the temperature of the wind, in the scent hidden beneath snow, in the low hum of the earth's shifting cold. Her wisdom guided them through the wide tundra, across patches of ice that hid beneath drifts, toward valleys where grasses lay waiting. The herd's safety lived in her steady rhythm, and as the day unfolded, her presence offered a deep reassurance, a reminder that survival in this vast and ancient world depended on memory, quiet, patient, and enduring. White ridges curved like frozen waves. The mammoths climbed them with patient strength. The snow dunes rose and fell across the tundra, shaped by months of drifting wind that sculpted the land into gentle rolling arcs. Each step carried the mammoths upward, their bodies moving slowly yet powerfully against the soft slopes. Snow shifted beneath their feet, cascading in tiny avalanches down the sides of the drifts as they passed. The climb was steady, deliberate, with calves taking shorter steps but following closely, guided by the comforting presence of adults. From the top of each dune, the world expanded, a pale ocean of white stretching out in all directions. The horizon distant and dreamlike, light glimmered across the ridges, catching the contours like soft brush strokes on a canvas of frost. The mammoths paused occasionally, their breath rising into the cold air before descending along the curve of the hill. Their wool rippled gently in the breeze, creating a quiet harmony with the shifting snow. As they descended the far side of each dune, snow gathered around their legs, offering a brief coolness before settling back into stillness. The dunes continued for miles, rolling one into the next like a vast frozen tide, and the mammoths moved with a patience shaped by the endless rhythm of winter. Their steps fell into grooves worn by countless migrations. The paths guided them quietly forward. Beneath the snow lay ancient trails carved by generations long gone, paths that remembered every footfall across ages of ice and wind. Without thinking, the mammoths followed the familiar lines, their bodies attuned to the subtle dips and rises hidden beneath the frost. The land itself seemed to guide them, its quiet memory merging with their own, creating an unbroken line between present and past. Calves stepped into the depressions left by adults, learning the trail through instinct and imitation. The air carried the faint scent of old roots, grasses that had grown here in warmer years, water that once trickled through thawed channels, the distant echo of migrations that shaped the steppe. These trails were not merely paths, they were stories etched into the earth by endurance and repetition, stretches of land that had known the weight of woolly bodies for thousands of winters. The herd moved with a sense of belonging, as though the snow shifted aside to welcome them home. Each step deepened the trail, adding new layers of memory to the route that future generations would follow long after this moment faded into time. And as they continued forward, their movement became a continuation of an ancient journey, flowing gently along a path that had always known their presence. Night unfolded in a glittering sweep above them. The mammoths continued beneath that silent sky. Stars shone with an intensity only possible in a world untouched by modern light, each point shimmering like ice suspended in darkness. The vastness above mirrored the white expanse below, turning the tundra into a reflection of the heavens. The mammoths walked slowly, their silhouettes dark against the starlit snow, their breath rising in ghostly plumes that drifted into the night. The sky felt endless, deep enough to hold memories of ages long past, quiet enough to cradle every slow movement of the herd. Moonlight painted the snow in soft shades of silver as constellations wheeled overhead, ancient patterns watching over the ancient creatures below. Calves stayed especially close during these hours, the cold deepening into a quiet that wrapped itself around everything. The ground seemed to glow faintly beneath the starlight, guiding their path with natural illumination. Each footstep pressed into a shimmering surface, leaving behind dark impressions that slowly filled with drifting frost. The night was long, but it felt gentle, a time for quiet travel, steady breath, and the soft comfort of being part of something larger than the land or the sky. Moonlight brushed their coats with silver calm. The world felt gentle in that light. The mammoths glowed faintly as they moved, each strand of wool catching the soft radiance and turning it into a quiet halo around their bodies. The pale light softened the harshness of winter, smoothing the cold edges of the tundra and creating a dreamlike glow that followed them across the snow. Shadows stretched long and delicate, barely rising above the surface of the frozen ground. Calves nestled close to the warmth of adults, their small forms bathed in the same silver glow, looking almost ethereal against the dark. The night air held a peaceful stillness, broken only by the occasional soft rustle of fur or the gentle crunch of snow underfoot. Moonlight settled along the arcs of their tusks, turning them into soft crescents suspended in the cold. The land exhaled slowly beneath them, releasing faint glimmers from frost-covered grasses and distant icy ridges. Beneath this quiet illumination, The mammoths felt like part of the night itself, ancient, calm, and luminous in their slow journey across the sleeping steppe. Cold air lay over everything like a still blanket. The mammoths breathed life into the quiet. Their warm exhalations rose into the static air, small waves of movement that softened the frozen stillness around them. The steppe felt suspended, as though time had paused to watch the herd pass gently through its sleeping expanse. The cold pressed closely against their wool, but their massive bodies radiated warmth that created faint halos of mist in their wake. Snow sat undisturbed on the ground, stretching wide and smooth beneath the slow passage of their feet. Even the distant hills seemed motionless, their shapes softened by frost. The breath of the mammoths, steady and rhythmic, added the only movement, gentle clouds drifting upward before dissolving into the unmoving air. As they moved, their presence shifted the quiet ever so slightly, a reminder that life endured even in the deepest cold. The land welcomed their warmth, holding it briefly before letting it blend into the vast, pale silence. Flakes spun softly around their legs. Nothing disturbed the slow fall. Snow drifted from a sky, heavy with winter, descending in delicate spirals that moved with the gentlest currents of air. The mammoths walked through the quiet cascade, their dark forms creating soft disturbances that sent flakes swirling upward before settling again. Each flake touched their wool lightly, disappearing into the thick layers that protected them from the bitter cold. The ground grew softer beneath them as a new snow gathered, cushioning their steps and muting even the faintest sound. Calves lifted their trunks to try and catch the drifting flakes, watching them melt instantly on warm skin. The falling snow thickened the stillness around the herd, wrapping their movement in a quiet veil. As they progressed, the flakes continued their slow descent, painting the world in gentle white strokes that brightened the landscape one breath at a time. A pair touched trunks in a quiet greeting. The gesture was warm despite the cold. The soft intertwining of their trunks carried a gentle reassurance, a bond formed through seasons spent navigating the frozen steppe together. The contact lasted only a moment, but it conveyed a depth of connection that words could never hold, a simple, intimate reminder of companionship in the vastness of winter. Their breath mingled briefly, small clouds rising into the cold air and forming a shared warmth between them. The surrounding herd moved slowly around the pair, each mammoth maintaining its own calm rhythm while acknowledging the soft interaction with subtle glances. In the frozen world, such touches were like embers, small sparks of warmth glowing against the endless cold. After the greeting, the two mammoths continued on, their steps aligning for a time before drifting apart again. But the comfort lingered, carried in the slow, deliberate sway of their bodies as they walked. Generations moved through the same frozen paths, knowledge passed without words. The land held the imprint of countless migrations, its surface shaped by the steady movement of mammoth herds that had followed these trails for ages. The young learned by watching the old how to read the curve of the wind, how to sense the depth of snow beneath their feet, how to recognize the subtle cues of the landscape. Everything they needed to know had been embedded into their shared journey, woven through instinct and repetition. Each footstep carried the memory of ancestors who had walked the same route, guided by the same stars and winds. Even the curve of the horizon echoed with their presence. The herd's movement created a bridge between past and present, a quiet continuity that survived the harshness of winter. As they advanced, they added their own layer to the ancient story, deepening the trail, strengthening the bond, and carrying the long memory forward like a gentle flame through the cold. Warmth shimmered faintly around them in the frigid air. Life glowed softly through winter. Their massive bodies radiated heat that slipped into the cold like a quiet pulse, creating a subtle halo that followed them across the snow. The warmth from the herd drifted upward, creating small ripples of mist that danced briefly before dissolving. Calves nestled against the adults, soaking in the shared heat that protected them from the biting winds. The contrast between the warm mammals and the frozen world created an almost magical glow, visible even in the dim light of dawn or dusk. Snow melted upon contact with their wool before freezing again into thin crystals that sparkled with each step. The air around them felt alive, animated by the warmth and breath of these ancient creatures. In a land defined by cold and stillness, the mammoths carried their own quiet fire, a soft glow that moved across the tundra with every slow, deliberate stride. A solitary male traveled at a distance, unhurried. His presence was a calm shadow against the snow. He moved parallel to the herd, close enough to see their shapes, but far enough to keep to his own rhythm. The cold air wrapped around him, catching the long strands of his wool and setting them into gentle motion. His tusks curved heavily toward the ground, their weight marking him as one who had weathered many seasons. He paused often, lifting his trunk to catch scents carried on the wind, reading the world with instinct honed through solitude. Though alone, he moved with steady confidence, a quiet traveler in a landscape vast enough to hold his presence without swallowing it. The snow beneath him compressed into deep singular prints that trailed behind like a slow poem written across the tundra. As he continued forward, his shadow stretched long across the pale surface, merging with the soft hush of winter and becoming part of the land's ancient calm. Clouds gathered in thick gray lines along the horizon. The mammoths kept moving, steady and sure. The approaching storm crept slowly across the sky, its weight hanging low above the frozen plains like a heavy blanket preparing to descend. The wind shifted subtly, carrying the cold scent of distant snowfall and the muted promise of stronger gusts to come. Yet the herd did not quicken their pace. Instinct taught them when to hurry and when to trust their slow, deliberate rhythm. The matriarch lifted her trunk, sensing the change in the air before guiding the herd toward shallow depressions in the land that would offer shelter. Snow began to swirl lightly at first, drifting in thin strands that danced around the mammoth's legs. As the clouds thickened, the light dimmed, softening the world into muted grays and whites. The herd pressed slightly closer together, their shared warmth rising in faint, glowing waves. Even as the first flakes of the storm touched the ground, the mammoths moved with the calm certainty of creatures who had survived countless winters, carrying the quiet strength of ages with every step. Wind curled through the grasses beneath the ice. Its voice hummed around the mammoths like a lullaby. The faint sound rose from the frozen earth, a low melodic whisper created by currents slipping through hidden layers of brittle blades. It blended with the deep rumble of the herd's movement, forming a gentle harmony that followed them across the plains. The wind carried stories from distant hills, scents of old trails, hints of upcoming weather, the quiet shift of snow settling into new shapes. The mammoths listened without pausing, attuned to the subtle language of the tundra. Calves leaned into the breeze, letting it brush through their wool like a cool hand. The grasses beneath the frozen surface trembled softly, releasing small sighs that drifted upward through thin sheets of ice. The combined sounds created a soothing chorus, a peaceful soundtrack to the herd's slow journey. As they moved on, the wind continued its quiet singing, weaving itself around their legs and trailing behind them like a gentle song carried across the winter landscape. They paused near a sheet of still, moonlit ice. Their breath rose in soft, rhythmic clouds. The frozen lake lay quiet beneath the night sky, its surface smooth and bright like polished stone. Reflections of stars shimmered gently across the ice, creating a mirror of the heavens that stretched between the Mammoths and the distant sky. The herd stood silently at the lake's edge, their massive bodies glowing in the moonlight, their breath forming delicate spirals that drifted upward and faded. Calves pressed close to the adults, entranced by the sparkling patterns beneath their feet. The cold air held every sound lightly, the faint crackling of frost, the distant rustle of wind through frozen grasses, the soft shift of mammoth wool as they moved. They stood in quiet reverence, as though the stillness of the lake invited them into a moment beyond time. After a while, they lowered their trunks to the surface, feeling the smoothness of the ice, sensing the ancient cold held within. When they finally moved on, their breath lingered briefly above the lake, small clouds floating over the reflection of stars before dissolving into the night. Darkness drifted through the strands of their fur. The world grew quieter with each passing moment. Night deepened around the herd, settling into the long wool that protected them from the cold, weaving itself into the shadows that clung to their massive forms. The fading light softened the edges of everything: the land, the sky, the slow movements of the mammoths, until they seemed like silhouettes wandering through a dream. Their breath rose in slow sighs, curling upward to join the darkness gathering above. Calves nestled closer to the adults, their tiny bodies warming against thick wool. The air grew colder, sharper, but the herd's warmth pressed back against the chill, creating a cocoon of living heat. Snow glittered faintly beneath the moon, each flake catching the dim light before melting into shadow. The world felt suspended, held in the quiet space between night and dawn, where nothing moved except the gentle sway of mammoth bodies making their way across the sleeping steppe. The ground compressed with each slow step. The sound was gentle, muted. Snow cushioned the mammoth's weight, absorbing most of the noise and leaving only a soft, rhythmic crunch that blended seamlessly with the stillness around them. Each footfall left a deep impression, a rounded hollow that marked their path while preserving the serenity of the winter landscape. Calves followed closely behind, placing their smaller feet into the prints left by adults, learning the rhythm of movement across snow that shifted with every change in the wind. The ground seemed to accept their weight willingly, the frozen earth flexing slightly beneath the steady pressure. Snow particles sparkled in tiny bursts each time a foot lifted, catching the light like minute stars scattering across the tundra. The herd's slow progress created a calm pattern: step, settle, step, settle, an unspoken cadence shared by all. The muted sound of their movement soothed the land, turning their journey into a quiet chorus carried across the open plain. Tusks sparkled as though dusted with stars. They curved like frozen crescents. The pale light of the sky met the smooth ivory, casting shimmering reflections that glided along the arcs each time the mammoths shifted their heads. Snowflakes collected on the tusk's surfaces, clinging for a moment before melting into tiny droplets that refroze in delicate patterns. The mammoths carried these crescents with natural grace, the long sweeping curves acting like gentle pendulums that moved in rhythm with their slow steps. Calves watched the gleaming ivory with admiration, often reaching out with their trunks to touch the cool surface. The tusks seemed to glow faintly, capturing the winter light and holding it like an ancient lantern. Even in the coldest moments, the ivory radiated quiet beauty, a symbol of strength shaped by years of growth. As the herd moved onward, the tusks continued to catch the light, scattering it across the snow in tiny glimmers that faded into the soft white landscape. Their movement resembled weather, slow and certain. They crossed the plains with quiet purpose. The herd drifted across the tundra like a low rolling cloud, their shapes rising and falling gently against the pale horizon. Snow swirled around their legs, shifting with the subtle currents created by their motion. Their pace matched the rhythm of the landscape, steady, seamless, unhurried. Each mammoth adjusted its position with instinctive precision, forming a fluid pattern that stretched and compressed like a murmuring breeze. The air carried the faint scent of wool, warmed by breath, mixing with the cold freshness of winter. Calves nestled within the drifting formation, protected from the wind on every side. The herd's movement created a sense of calm, a slow, rolling presence that echoed the natural patterns of the weather around them. As they continued across the plains, they seemed less like individuals and more like a single graceful force moving with purpose across the frozen world. The sun hovered low, casting long shadows. Even its warmth felt ancient. The pale light skimmed across the tundra, stretching the mammoths' silhouettes far across the snow, turning them into dark, elongated shapes that blended into the winter landscape. The warmth that touched their wool was faint, barely enough to soften the cold, yet it carried the familiar comfort of daylight. The mammoths lifted their heads slightly as the sun's rays brushed over them, absorbing what little heat filtered through the icy air. Their shadows moved like soft strokes across the pale ground, shifting gently with each step. The sky held a washed-out glow, a color born of ice crystals and distant light. The mammoth's wool caught the sun in small glimmers, warming just enough to create thin wisps of steam rising from their bodies. The ancient sun watched over them as it had over countless generations, offering its gentle, steady presence even in the heart of winter. The adults formed a wide circle of protection. Their presence created a warm pocket of life. Calves nestled into the center, surrounded by the towering forms of their guardians, each adult standing firm against the cold air pressing in from the open tundra. Their massive bodies blocked the wind, turning the circle into a sheltered haven where warmth pooled and lingered. The calves leaned into one another, their soft wool touching as they drifted into quiet rest. The adults stood with patient stillness, watching the horizon with slow, sweeping glances, an unspoken vow to keep the young safe. Warm breath rose from the enclosed space, forming a gently swirling mist that drifted upward like a soft signal of life. The ground within the circle felt warmer, snow melting slightly from the heat shared among them. The mammoths remained in this formation for as long as needed, becoming a living wall of comfort and protection. Their presence radiated a calm strength, turning the freezing world into a place where warmth, safety, and connection endured. Their exhalations lingered like small clouds. Each one dissolved slowly in the cold. The breath of the mammoths drifted upward in soft, pearly wisps that hovered in the frozen air before fading into the stillness. These warm clouds seemed to suspend time, hanging just long enough to glow in passing light before vanishing into the endless white. The cold sharpened every plume, turning each exhale into a delicate sculpture of vapor that shimmered faintly in the morning quiet. Calves watched the rising clouds with dreamy fascination, their own smaller breaths creating tiny shadows of warmth that curled around their trunks. The air around the herd felt alive for those brief moments, animated by breath alone in a world otherwise frozen and unmoving. Frost gathered along their mouths and eyelashes, catching sparks of light in intricate, crystalline patterns. The tundra accepted their warmth gently, letting each puff melt into the winter air without resistance. As the mammoths continued forward, breath after breath, the quiet rhythm of exhalations became a pulse within the frozen silence. Slow, steady, and full of life. Sunlight touched their backs in soft gold. It made them glow like moving hills. The early rays warmed the wool along their shoulders and spines, creating a gentle radiance that followed them across the snow. The golden light softened the hard edges of winter, painting the mammoths' forms with a warmth that felt almost tender in contrast to the biting cold. Their fur shimmered like fields of tall grass swaying under summer sun, each strand illuminated in glowing hues that drifted between amber and pale fire. The calves pressed closer to the adults, basking in the heat that gathered beneath the light. Shadows stretched at their feet, long and fluid, mirroring the slow sway of their bodies as they walked. The snow sparkled beneath them, bright reflections of the golden glow, transforming the tundra into a landscape of soft brilliance. Even the wind seemed gentler, moving carefully through the illuminated wool. The mammoths carried the sunlight with them like a blessing, glowing as they moved deeper into the quiet day. Wind-carved hollows offered brief shelter. The mammoths paused in their shade. These shallow caves of snow, sculpted by seasons of storm and restless air, formed delicate alcoves that curved like frozen waves. The herd stepped into them with slow, deliberate motions, feeling the temperature shift from biting wind to soft stillness. The hollows protected them from the gusts sweeping across the plain, offering a momentary refuge that wrapped around their bodies like a silent embrace. Calves nestled close to the interior walls, their wool brushing the smooth, compacted snow. The adults stood watchfully nearby, their silhouettes outlined by the pale light filtering through the entrance. The quiet inside the hollow felt deep, almost sacred, a place where the world's harshness softened for a few breaths. Frost clung to the walls in delicate patterns, reflecting faint glimmers of the outside light. After resting, the mammoths stepped out again, their peaceful paws lingering with them as they returned to the open steppe. They stood still for long moments, listening. The world responded with silence. In that suspended pause, the herd became part of the tundra itself, unmoving, watchful, attuned to the faintest shifts in the air. Snow fell in tiny grains that landed without sound, gathering around their massive feet. The horizon stretched in every direction, quiet and vast, holding its breath along with the mammoths. Their ears twitched slightly, listening for signals carried across frozen distance, the distant crack of ice, the soft rustle of wind across low hills, the low hum of the earth settling beneath the cold. Nothing stirred, even the wind paused, as though honoring the herd's stillness. The mammoths remained motionless, their steady breaths rising into the silent air like soft offerings. Eventually, the faintest sound drifted in, a distant rumble, perhaps another herd, perhaps the earth shifting beneath layers of frost. The mammoths accepted the silence, then continued forward, patient as the winter itself. Their trunks traced the ground with gentle curiosity. A faint scent of green drifted upward. Beneath the hard crust of snow lay remnants of life, frozen grasses, brittle stems, hints of plant memory preserved beneath winter's heavy blanket. The mammoths swept their trunks slowly across the surface, brushing aside frost in delicate motions practiced across generations. Each subtle scent carried a message: where food might be found, where it had grown before, where it might grow again. The calves attempted to imitate the careful tracing, drawing small circles in the snow. Even when nothing lay beneath, the herd gathered around, promising spots, loosening snow to reveal thin ribbons of green that held enough nourishment to warm their bodies. The faint aroma of grass rose into the cold air, a soft reminder of warmer seasons yet to return. With each uncovered patch, hope glimmered gently beneath the ice, offering the herd another moment of calm persistence in the heart of winter. Small birds glided in slow spirals overhead. Their cries faded into the distance. The birds moved with a lightness that contrasted the mammoth's grounded presence, tracing loops through the clear, cold air as if stitching invisible patterns across the sky. Their wings caught the sunlight, creating quick flashes of white and gray that flickered like drifting snowflakes. The mammoths lifted their heads slightly to watch the circling forms, their calm eyes following the graceful arcs. These birds often traveled alongside the herd, drawn to the exposed patches of earth and insects revealed when mammoths disturbed the snow. Their soft calls blended with the gentle hush of the tundra, adding a touch of motion to the still world. As the birds spiraled higher, their cries became faint whispers on the wind, dissolving into the vastness above. The mammoths resumed their slow journey, accompanied by the fading echoes of wings. As clouds thickened, darkness crept across the steppe. The mammoths moved through it like smoke. Shadows swallowed the pale landscape, turning snow into shifting layers of soft gray. The light dwindled, muted by storm clouds gathering low in the sky, casting dim veils over the rolling plains. Yet the mammoths continued unbothered, their woolly forms blending seamlessly into the deepening dusk. They became silhouettes against the heavy air, drifting shapes that moved with calm certainty through the approaching storm. Their tusks glinted faintly with the last traces of daylight, curving like pale wisps through the darkness. Snow began to fall in thicker flakes, swirling around them as they advanced, turning their movement into a quiet dance between light and shadow. Even as the storm's edge approached, the herd's steady rhythm remained unchanged, their presence as constant and enduring as winter itself. They lay close in shallow valleys of snow, warmth spread between them like quiet fire. The gentle bowl of the valley cradled their massive bodies, sheltering them from the wind that swept across the higher ridges. Snow formed a soft nest around them, muffling sounds and dimming the world into a peaceful hush. The mammoths pressed their sides together, sharing heat that radiated outward in a slow, steady glow. Calves nestled tightly between adults, surrounded by a cocoon of wool and breath that kept the cold at bay. Their eyes grew heavy as the night deepened, reflecting faint glimmers of stars peering down from above. The herd's breath rose in soft clouds, merging into the night air and drifting upward like a collective sigh. In the valley's shelter, they rested without fear, the world around them settling into stillness as sleep pressed gently into their limbs. Their warmth lingered long after their breathing slowed, creating a pocket of life glowing softly in the frozen dark. Tiny points of starlight shimmered across their gaze. The night sky lived within them as they lifted their heads. The reflection of constellations danced in the dark wells of their eyes, turning their calm expressions into mirrors of the heavens above. Each blink scattered the stars momentarily before they reassembled in quiet brilliance. The mammoths seemed to carry the sky with them, ancient creatures gazing at ancient light, both timeless in their slow, deliberate presence. The air grew stiller, colder, as the night deepened around the herd. Calves leaned against their elders, watching the sky through the warm haze of shared breath. The stars shimmered with faint motion, as though acknowledging the passage of the mammoths moving serenely below. In their eyes, the vastness above looked close enough to touch, a soft, flickering promise carried in their steady gaze as they drifted across the sleeping steppe. Their exhalations melted small circles of snow. The shapes glowed faintly in moonlight. Each warm breath carved tiny hollows into the frozen surface, revealing darker layers beneath the pale crust. The contrast shimmered gently beneath the soft, lunar glow, turning each melted circle into a small, glowing pool. As the mammoths moved, they left behind a scattered constellation of these warm impressions, traces of life in an otherwise stark landscape. Calves paused to sniff at the steaming circles, curious about the sudden warmth emerging in the cold. Frost gathered along the edges where melted snow refroze, forming delicate rims of ice around each impression. The moonlight caught these icy edges, making them sparkle like tiny rings scattered across the tundra. With every breath, the herd reshaped the snow in small, gentle ways, leaving warmth pressed into winter stillness as they continued their silent journey. Morning light warmed the ice crystals. Mammoths stirred with slow grace. The first stretch of dawn spread across the steppe, turning frost into a glittering tapestry that clung to every surface. The mammoths rose from their resting places with deliberate, unhurried movements, their wool catching the gold of early light. Their breaths came in deep, steady clouds as they shook off the night's chill. The frost along their backs sparkled as they shifted, sending tiny fragments of ice drifting downward like drifting stars returning to the snow. Calves rose last, blinking slowly at the brightness and stretching against the warmth radiating from the adults. The world felt new again under the soft glow of dawn, every surface glistening with light that softened the harshness of winter. The herd gathered their strength from the rising sun, ready to continue their steady journey across the awakening plain. Thin crusts cracked beneath their weight. The noise was gentle, rhythmic. With each step, the surface layer of snow fractured in brittle, delicate patterns, releasing soft, snapping sounds that echoed quietly through the cold air. The mammoths continued their steady pace, their feet pressing deeply into the snow as the thin crust surrendered beneath them. Calves, lighter and smaller, broke through the surface with softer creaks, their prints forming shallower depressions alongside their elders. The cracked snow created a mosaic of jagged edges that glinted faintly under the winter light. As the herd moved forward, the rhythmic cracking became a subtle soundtrack to their slow progress, a gentle reminder of the frozen world beneath them. Even the sound of breaking snow felt peaceful, blending seamlessly into the hush of the plains. A breeze moved through their coats like drifting grass. The motion was soothing to watch. The long strands of wool swayed gently, each movement catching the light in soft, rippling waves. The wind carried the faint scent of distant pines and frozen earth brushing through the mammoths' coats with a tenderness that seemed almost deliberate. Calves leaned into the breeze, feeling it weave through their shorter fur as they watched the adult's wool ripple in slow, mesmerizing patterns. The movement looked like a field of tall grass, responding to a soft summer wind, despite the deep winter cold that surrounded them. As the breeze continued, it created a gentle harmony with the shifting light, making the herd appear almost fluid, as though they were part of the wind itself. The mammoths walked on, their coats swaying in unison, each ripple a quiet reminder of nature's softest touch. Their steps angled quietly toward rising land. The path ahead gleamed with frost. The gentle incline stretched before them like a pale ribbon, leading toward distant hills coated in shimmering white. Each step the mammoths took left deep impressions that glinted under the morning light. The frost-covered ground sparkled with countless tiny crystals, each one catching the sun and scattering it in subtle flashes. Calves followed the adults carefully, learning how to navigate the incline without slipping. The herd moved in patient formation, their wool catching the light in warm tones against the cold surface. As they ascended, the air grew clearer, offering a wide view of the frozen plains behind them. The hills ahead promised shelter and perhaps patches of hidden grass beneath the snow. With steady determination, the herd continued toward the shimmering path, guided by instincts shaped through generations of winter journeys. A pale fog drifted upward from the lowlands. It wrapped around the mammoths like breath made visible. The mist curled gently through the air, weaving between their legs and rising along the wool of their bodies. The cold trapped the fog close to the ground, creating a soft blanket that hovered in delicate layers. The mammoths moved through it with quiet ease, their forms appearing and disappearing within the pale haze. Calves stayed close, following the faint silhouettes of adults as the fog shifted around them. The lowlands exhaled this mist in slow pulses, each one sending new swirls of vapor into the winter air. The fog glowed faintly under the soft light, creating an almost dreamlike world where sound and shape blended into calm stillness. The mammoths continued forward, wrapped in the gentle embrace of the rising mist. Heat radiated softly from their massive forms. It shimmered in the cold light. The warm air surrounding the mammoths created faint distortions in the landscape, small wavering mirages that danced above their wool. This warmth rose slowly, forming a quiet barrier between their bodies and the biting cold that pressed in from the open plain. Calves nestled close to the adults, seeking comfort in the steady glow that surrounded the herd. The heat made tiny particles of frost shimmer as they passed through the air, catching stray beams of sunlight and scattering them like fragile sparks. Even the snow beneath them softened slightly in response, forming rounded depressions that marked their passage. The herd carried their warmth with them like a traveling hearth, a beacon of life glowing softly in winter's grasp. Where the sun touched the ice, clear water gathered. They lowered their trunks to drink, slow and steady. The meltwater formed shallow pools that reflected pale skies and distant ridges, shimmering gently in the morning calm. The mammoths approached with quiet reverence, dipping their trunks into the cold water and lifting it to their mouths in slow, practiced motions. Ripples spread across the surface, creating delicate rings that drifted outward before settling once more. Calves watched closely, mimicking the movements with smaller, tentative gestures. The water tasted fresh and clean, a rare gift in the frozen world, and the herd lingered to drink their fill. Afterward, droplets clung to their trunks, glistening like beads of glass before falling back into the pool. The quiet moment of drinking became a shared ritual, a pause of nourishment and calm before the journey continued. Flakes drifted downward without a sound. The mammoths moved through the quiet as though floating. The snowfall thickened the stillness around them, wrapping the world in a soft, white veil. Each flake landed gently on their wool, blending seamlessly into the layers already gathered there. The snow muted their footsteps, turning even the deepest prints into slow impressions swallowed by the drift. Calves lifted their faces toward the falling flakes, eyes half-lidded as they enjoyed the cool touch of winter settling lightly over them. The wind calmed to almost nothing, allowing the flakes to fall in perfectly straight lines, creating an illusion of suspended time. As the mammoths advanced, they left behind only the faintest disturbances in the perfect white, slow-moving shapes passing through a world softened into silence. A faint smell of grass and pine reached them, their trunks lifted to read the air. The scent drifted across the frozen plain like a whisper of seasons long past, carried gently by the shifting breeze. The mammoths paused, inhaling deeply, letting the faint aromas guide them toward possible patches of food or sheltered valleys. Calves imitated the adults, raising their small trunks in hopeful curiosity. The air held a promise that stirred ancient instincts, a subtle sign that life still persisted beneath the snow. The mammoths turned slightly, adjusting their path toward the source of the scent. The promise of green, however faint, warmed the cold air around them, guiding their slow and steady steps across the frost-coated land. As dusk approached, they gathered into a protective ring. Calm settled over them. The sky deepened into soft shades of lavender and blue, casting a gentle glow across the snow. The herd arranged themselves instinctively, forming a wide circle that enclosed the calves in its warm center. Each adult stood at attention, facing outward toward the encroaching night, their silhouettes tall and steady. The shared warmth collected in the center of the ring, creating a cocoon of heat that pulsed gently into the air. Calves nestled together, drifting into drowsy calm as the light faded around them. The adults remained still, their breath rising in slow, rhythmic clouds. The world outside the ring grew darker and quieter, but within the circle, peace settled deeply. The night approached with soft steps, and the mammoths welcomed it in steady, silent unity. Long lines marked where they had passed. Each print held the weight of time. The impressions stretched across the frozen steppe like gentle signatures, each one pressed deep into the snow by thousands of pounds of ancient strength. The cold preserved them in perfect detail, rounded edges, softened ridges, the subtle hints of movement frozen in place. These prints told stories without sound, stories of slow migration, quiet endurance, and the steady rhythm of life shaped by winter. Calves walked in the paths left by the adults, their smaller feet fitting neatly into the larger hollows, as though stepping into the footprints of the past. Wind brushed lightly over the trail, stirring loose snow into drifting ribbons that curled around the edges but never fully erased them. The line of impressions pulled across the horizon, disappearing into pale light and reappearing again with the curve of the land. Even when the herd was no longer visible, the earth remembered their passage in this quiet script of compressed snow. It was a map of movement, of presence, of survival written gently across the tundra. And as the wind whispered around the prints, the land seemed to acknowledge them, holding each footprint a little longer before winter slowly softened their edges into memory. She stood still at the crest of a snowy rise. The air carried stories only she seemed to hear. Her ears lifted slightly as she listened, reading the wind the way elders read the lines of a familiar path. Every shift of air brought traces of distant things, faint vibrations traveling through frost, the soft murmur of snow settling on itself, the far-off pulse of ice expanding beneath the weight of winter. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting instinct guide her understanding of what lay ahead. Behind her, the herd waited in patient silence, trusting her wisdom shaped by seasons etched into her bones. Her breath rose in slow clouds that drifted away on the breeze, marking the passage of each thoughtful moment. The world felt open and vast from where she stood, the horizon stretching like a quiet promise across the frozen steppe. Whatever she sensed, subtle weather shifts, the nearness of shelter, or the echo of another herd, it guided her next steps with certainty. When she finally moved, it was with calm authority, her pace steady and sure. The herd followed without hesitation, their trust wrapped tightly around her steady presence. The rise behind them held the imprint of her pause, a moment of listening that shaped their path through the silent land. Daylight diffused through falling flakes. Everything took on a gentle glow. The snow acted like a veil, softening the harsh edges of the tundra and blending sky and earth into a single pale canvas. Light moved slowly through the drifting flakes, catching on their delicate surfaces and scattering into faint halos that surrounded the mammoths as they walked. Their wool shimmered under the soft illumination, turning them into dreamlike figures moving through a world muted by frost and light. The air felt hushed beneath the snowfall, each flake absorbing sound before it reached the ground. Calves blinked against the gentle flurry, their dark eyes reflecting the glowing white that swirled around them. The mammoth's steps pressed softly into the snow, leaving rounded prints that seemed to float within the luminous haze. Even their breath became part of the light, rising in pale clouds that blended seamlessly into the softly glowing air. The world felt suspended between day and night, held in a quiet radiance where time moved at the pace of drifting snow. And as the flakes continued to fall, the mammoths moved forward like slow constellations crossing a sky made of winter. A shallow dip in the land held warmth. They settled there with quiet ease. The hollow cradled the herd gently, offering shelter from the biting wind that swept relentlessly across the open plains. Its walls, shaped by centuries of snow and melt, curved around them like a natural embrace. The air inside felt softer, touched by the heat radiating from their bodies as they settled close together. Snow packed beneath them, cushioning their weight and creating a soft bed that muffled even the faintest movement. Calves nestled between adults, drifting into drowsiness as the shared warmth deepened around them. Above, the sky remained pale and distant, but within the hollow, the cold felt farther away, held at bay by the quiet companionship of the herd. Small puffs of breath rose in steady intervals, merging into a gentle haze that hovered above their forms. The stillness of the sheltered dip created a moment of peace, a pause in the endless cycle of travel and survival. Resting there, the mammoths became part of the land's quiet contours, breathing warmth into a place shaped by winter's hand. Snow swirled in gentle spirals at their feet. The patterns shifted like dreams. Each gust of wind sent flakes dancing in delicate loops, tracing invisible circles around the mammoth's legs before drifting into the open air. The spirals formed and dissolved in seamless motion, their shapes fluid and ephemeral, as though the snow itself were whispering stories in a language of motion. Calves watched the swirling patterns with wide-eyed fascination, lifting their feet slowly, as if not to disturb the delicate shapes. The adults moved with steady patience, their presence creating subtle currents that shaped the drifting snow. Light from the muted sky caught the spirals in faint shimmering tones, giving the falling flakes an almost magical glow. The patterns grew and faded with each step, leaving no trace behind except the quiet feeling of wonder they inspired. The wind carried the snow in soft pulses, lifting it for a moment before letting it settle gently onto the frozen ground. These swirling moments, fleeting, intricate, beautiful, offered the herd a small, gentle artistry woven into the heart of winter's stillness. Clouds hung low, heavy with quiet intention. The mammoths walked beneath them without fear. The sky felt close enough to touch, its weight settling over the tundra in a soft, muted embrace. The dim light that filtered through the thick clouds cast the world in shades of gray, smoothing the landscape into long stretches of quiet shadow. The mammoths moved steadily forward, their dark forms blending into the softened horizon as though they were part of the sky drifting across the land. A calm hush filled the air, the kind that arrives before snow begins to fall, when the world pauses in anticipation. The herd seemed to welcome the stillness, their breath rising in slow, deliberate clouds that merged easily with the heavy sky. Calves stayed close, comforted by the steady pace of the adults. The low ceiling of clouds wrapped the world in a cocoon of waiting, yet nothing felt threatening in that muted space. It was simply winter preparing its next quiet offering. The mammoths continued beneath the dim sky, holding warmth and life beneath its soft weight. It swung its small trunk in curious arcs. Each movement felt like discovery. The calf explored the world one slow sweep at a time, testing the air, brushing snow, touching the wool of nearby adults. Its trunk wavered clumsily at first, tracing unsteady loops that sometimes ended in a puff of snow or a surprised blink. But each attempt brought learning, a new texture, a new scent, a new understanding of the frozen world around it. The adults watched with gentle patience, stepping carefully so the calf could mimic their motions without fear. Sometimes it reached toward a fallen twig or a shallow drift, delighted by the simple act of moving the world with its small trunk. Snowflakes landed on its soft skin, melting into tiny droplets that glittered briefly before vanishing. With every new arc, the calf grew a little more confident, its movement smoother, its curiosity deeper. The herd surrounded it like a living classroom, offering silent lessons in a language older than memory. And as the calf continued its wide, playful sweeps, the frozen steppe became a place of endless wonder, waiting beneath winter's calm. White crystals gathered around their eyes. They blinked slowly, unbothered. Frost formed delicate accents along their long lashes, glimmering like tiny beads of glass in the cold light. Each slow blink sent faint shivers through the crystals, scattering tiny sparkles into the air before they reformed again. The mammoths stood calm and steady, their eyes patient and dark beneath the pale dusting of ice. The frost softened their expressions, giving them an almost gentle, dreamlike appearance as they watched the quiet world around them. Calves looked up through their own frosted lashes, blinking curiously as the flakes settled on their small faces. The cold sharpened every detail, the glint of moisture along their eyelids, the tiny crystals suspended in wool, the soft hush of snow collecting around them. Yet the mammoths remained unfazed, their steady presence radiating warmth even beneath winter's adornment. With each blink, the frost rearranged itself, a shifting pattern dancing in the quiet light of the frozen day. Dark shapes of trees rose in the distance. The herd drifted in that direction. The promise of shelter drew them forward across the open plain, their silhouettes moving slowly against the pale horizon. The trees stood like dark sentinels, their branches heavy with frost, and their trunks offering a rare barrier from the biting wind. As the mammoths approached, the scent of bark and cold earth drifted into the air, a faint reminder of forest long gone. The herd moved between the trees with quiet reverence, their broad forms brushing lightly against branches that had endured winters as old as they were. Snow softened beneath the canopy, creating a gentler surface for tired feet. Calves pressed close to the adults, comforted by the enclosed space and the muted sounds that filtered through the frost-covered branches. The trees held the wind at bay, letting the mammoth's warmth settle into the cold air like a soft glow. Within the shelter, the world felt smaller, safer, wrapped in the quiet protection of winter's wooden walls. A deep gray spread across the horizon. The world held still beneath it. The coming storm cast a heavy shadow over the tundra, dimming the light and quieting the wind, as though nature itself paused to prepare. The mammoths sensed the shift, lifting their trunks to taste the cold air thickening with moisture. Snowflakes hovered at the edge of falling, suspended in the muted calm before the storm's release. The herd moved more closely together, their unity forming a warm barrier against the stillness that settled over the plain. Even the calves grew quiet, sensing the energy in the air, their footsteps slowing to match the adults' measured pace. The horizon darkened further, blending sky and land into a seamless sheet of gray. In that moment of silence, everything felt fluid, balance between breath and the snowfall, movement and stillness. And as the first faint flakes drifted downward, the mammoths continued steadily forward, ready to meet the storm with the same quiet resilience that carried them through every long winter. Flakes fell in a thin, endless curtain. The mammoths barely made a sound as they moved. The snow drifted downward in soft, delicate lines, each flake descending at its own unhurried pace, filling the air with a gentle white shimmer. The herd passed through the silent snowfall like shadows gliding across a muted landscape, their wool collecting tiny crystals that sparkled before melting into warmth. The ground softened beneath the accumulating snow, cushioning their steps and muffling even the faintest crunch. Calves lifted their faces toward the white curtain, blinking as flakes settled on their lashes, fascinated by the quiet beauty drifting around them. The wind paused, allowing the snowfall to descend in perfectly vertical strands, as though the sky were brushing the ground with threads of light. The mammoth's slow movement stirred the curtain only slightly, creating soft eddies that closed again as soon as they passed. Each breath rose in a warm cloud that momentarily held flakes in suspension before releasing them back into the falling drift. The world around them faded into a soft blur, transformed by snow into a place where time seemed to drift as gently as the flakes themselves. The ice surface shone like polished stone, their reflections stretched long beneath them. The frozen river captured the light of stars and moon, turning it into a shimmering path that mirrored every slow step the mammoths took. Each movement sent faint pulses of brightness ripple across the ice, as though the river were breathing with them. Their shadows blended into reflections, creating doubled silhouettes that drifted side by side through the pale night. The air above the river felt colder, sharpened by the smooth expanse beneath their feet, yet the herd moved with calm assurance. Calves stepped carefully, watching the reflections wobble with each tentative footfall. The adults guided them forward with slow, steady strides, trusting the river that had carried generations across its frozen back. A faint hum of shifting ice echoed from below, a deep ancient sound that vibrated through the cold air. Stars shimmered in the glassy surface, turning the river into a ribbon of night sky lying across the land. As they crossed, the mammoths left no trace, only the quiet echo of their breath and the soft glow of reflections stretching endlessly beneath them. They pressed close when winds grew strong. Heat traveled from one body to another. The herd formed a tight cluster, their massive shapes creating a living wall that shielded the calves from the biting gusts sweeping across the tundra. Warmth radiated outward, filling the spaces between them with a gentle shared glow that softened the harshness of winter's breath. The wind tugged at their wool, pulling loose strands into the air before letting them settle again in drifting curls. Calves nestled deeper into the warmth, their small bodies trembling slightly before relaxing into the security of the herd's embrace. The adults stood steady, leaning into the wind with calm resolve, their breath rising in thick clouds that merged together before being carried away. The storm's cold fingers probed the edges of their formation, but could not breach the circle of shared heat. Through this closeness, strength flowed invisibly between them, quiet, steady, and ancient. When the wind finally eased, the herd remained gathered for a moment longer, savoring the warmth and unity before continuing their slow journey across the frozen land. One stayed alert while the others rested. Its silhouette stood calm in the dim light. The lone sentinel watched the horizon with quiet vigilance, its massive form outlined against the soft glow of moonlit snow. Breath rose from its trunk in slow, steady plumes that drifted upward before dissolving into the dark. The night around it was still, broken only by the faint rustle of wool as the resting herd shifted gently in their sleep. Stars glimmered overhead, their distant light reflecting in the watchful mammoth's eyes. The cold pressed close, but the sentinel remained unmoved, anchored by a sense of responsibility older than memory. Every now and then, it lifted its trunk to test the air, reading the faintest shifts in scent or sound. Behind it, calves slept peacefully, sheltered by the circle of adults whose bodies formed a wall of warmth in the snow. The watching mammoth's presence was a quiet promise, one of safety, awareness, and unspoken guardianship. Only when dawn hinted at the edges of the sky did it lower its head, satisfied that the night had passed in peace. Fresh flakes softened the mark they left behind, The land reset itself gently. The deep impressions that once traced the herd's path began to blur beneath the whisper of falling snow, each footprint slowly filling as winter smoothed the surface of the steppe. The wind carried fine crystals across the ground, depositing them in thin, delicate layers that softened every curve and edge. The landscape seemed to sigh as it reclaimed the shape of its surface, erasing the traces of movement with gentle insistence. Calves glanced back occasionally, watching their own small prints vanish as if swallowed by time. What had moments before been a clear trail now appeared as an unbroken expanse of white, untouched and calm. The herd moved forward, leaving behind only faint dimples in the fresh snow before even those faded. The world returned to its pristine stillness, as though the mammoths had drifted through a dream rather than across solid ground. And in the quiet that followed, winter continued its soft work of renewal. Their exhalations wound upward like pale smoke. Each one faded slowly into the cold. The warm breath rose in delicate twists, curling through the icy air in lazy spirals that shimmered briefly in the dim light. The cold sharpened the outlines of each plume, holding them suspended for several long heartbeats before letting them dissolve into the vast winter sky. Calves watched the curling mist with fascination, trying to mimic the adults' deep breaths, though their own clouds rose smaller, lighter, and quicker to fade. The herd's steady inhalations and exhalations created a gentle rhythm that drifted across the stillness, a breathing chorus that warmed the quiet space around them. Frost clung to their trunks and mouths, forming thin crystals that sparkled as they lifted their heads. The slow spirals of breath felt like a part of the landscape itself, soft, patient, and ephemeral. And as the mammoths continued onward, each fading plume marked a moment of warmth pressed into winter's endless cold. Their wool caught the faint morning light. It glowed like embers beneath frost. The long, thick strands shimmered with soft hues of orange and gold as the first rays of dawn filtered across the steppe. Frost that had gathered during the night melted slowly into tiny droplets, each bead catching the light and turning their coats into glowing tapestries of warmth against the cold. The mammoths moved with gentle grace, their wool rippling in slow waves as they walked. Calves brushed against the adults, feeling the contrast of warmth beneath the shimmering frost. The glow spread through the herd, creating an illusion of small fires moving across the frozen land, living sparks wrapped in ancient wool. The morning air hushed itself around them, as though honoring the quiet light they carried. The frost continued to melt, releasing faint wisps of steam that drifted upward before fading into the dawn. And with every step, the mammoths brought a small promise of warmth into the cold world, awakening around them. They stepped into hollows carved by glaciers. The silence felt ancient, held for ages. The valleys dipped gently between frozen ridges, their smooth contours shaped by ice that had long since retreated, leaving behind footprints of a landscape sculpted over millennia. The air within these hollows was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of untouched snow and stone. As the mammoths entered, their massive forms seemed to settle into a deeper quiet, as though acknowledging the history held in the frozen ground beneath them. Their footsteps echoed softly, muffled by the snow but resonant enough to stir memories embedded in the valley's walls. Calves lingered near the edges, gazing at the towering slopes with wide-eyed wonder. The adults moved with deliberate calm, their presence blending into the ancient silence like a continuation of the glacier's slow retreat. Light filtered into the hollow in thin, glowing bands, illuminating the path ahead with gentle clarity. And as the herd drifted deeper into the quiet space, it felt as though time itself paused to watch them move through the relics of ages long gone. Light caught in the moisture along their lashes, it shimmered like tiny stars. The delicate droplets clung to the edges of their eyes, sparkling as the mammoths blinked slowly in the cold morning air. Frost had woven itself into fine patterns along their lashes, creating a soft frame of glimmering white that accentuated their calm, deep gaze. Each movement sent a faint flicker of light across the crystals, tiny bursts that appeared and vanished like whispers of constellations. Calves gazed around with innocent curiosity, their own lashes adorned with smaller droplets that shifted with every blink. The mammoth's eyes reflected the pale sky, the slow falling snow, and the soft glow of winter sun, turning their expressions into living mirrors of the frozen world. As they walked, the shimmering droplets gradually melted from the warmth of their bodies, leaving faint trails of moisture that evaporated into the cold. Yet for those quiet moments, their eyes held the delicate magic of starlight captured in frost. It tucked itself beneath warm bodies. The herd formed a sheltering wall. The calf nestled into the center of the group, surrounded on all sides by the towering forms of adults whose wool radiated deep, steady warmth. Their massive bodies blocked the wind, turning the cold air aside and creating a pocket of comfort where the smallest among them could rest without fear. The calf pressed its face into the long strands of wool, breathing in the familiar scent of safety and family. The adults shifted only slightly, adjusting their stance to better protect the calf while maintaining the quiet unity that defined their bond. Above, snow drifted gently downward, landing harmlessly on the living wall that encircled the young one. The warmth held within the circle rose in slow waves, forming a soft haze that lingered just above their backs. In that protected space, the calf's breathing slowed, matching the calm rhythm of the herd. The world outside remained cold and wide, but within the shelter of the mammoths, the calf found peace, wrapped in ancient, gentle strength. Their tusks traced wide arcs through the air. Snow dusted their surfaces. The pale ivory seemed to hold its own light as the mammoths moved, each swing slow and deliberate, shaped by years of steady strength. Snowflakes clung to the curves, forming delicate outlines along the smooth crescents before melting into faint droplets. The wide arcs marked their passage in gentle gestures, almost like strokes of a brush, painting through winter's stillness. The tusks stirred small drifts of loose snow as they passed, sending whispered cascades swirling toward the ground. Calves watched the movements with quiet fascination, trying to understand the rhythm and weight of those ancient tools. In the pale morning light, the ivory gleamed softly, holding a warmth that contrasted the frozen land around them. Each tusk spoke of age, survival, and memory, shaped by countless winters. As the mammoths continued their slow journey, the arcs traced gentle paths through the air, leaving momentary impressions before blending back into the quiet rhythm of their movement. Snow continued to gather lightly along the ivory, a soft reminder of the world through which they drifted, cold, endless, and lit by small reflections of ancient life. Stiff blades brushed together with faint sounds. The mammoths walked through them unbothered. The frozen grass swayed slightly beneath the light pressure of their steps, releasing a soft, whispering music that rose and fell like distant breath, each blade, brittle from winter's grip, rubbed against its neighbor to create a delicate chorus that followed the herd across the plains. The mammoths' massive feet compressed the grass without haste, their movement steady and sure, turning the faint song into a soft hum that blended seamlessly with the stillness around them. Calves paused to sniff at the icy stems, curious about the dry, rustling sounds drifting through the air. Wind wove through the grass as well, adding its own quiet whistle to the natural melody. The herd continued onward, their presence bending the frozen blades as though brushing fingers gently across a winter harp. The small sounds lingered briefly before dissolving into the silence that always returned, patient and wide. In this frozen world, even the faintest noises felt like reminders of life persisting beneath the cold. Darkness followed moving clouds. The mammoths blended into each shift of light. Shadows swept slowly across the steppe as the storm clouds drifted overhead, dimming the snow in gradual breathing waves. The mammoths' forms softened with every passing shadow, their silhouettes merging seamlessly with the changing tones of the land. Light and darkness passed over them like long, quiet tides, each shift subtle yet hypnotic. Their wool caught the dim glow of the muted sky, absorbing it until they looked like part of the weather itself, half shape, half shadow. Calves walked closer to the adults as the world darkened, seeking comfort in the familiar warmth of the herd. The land grew quiet beneath the heavy clouds, the only movement the steady, unhurried steps of the mammoths and the slow drift of shifting light. The shadows deepened before easing again, wrapping the herd in alternating layers of dusk and calm gray. And through each shift, the mammoths moved with timeless patience, carrying their warmth through the cold transitions of the passing storm. Tall, frozen walls rose beside them, their wool brushed lightly against hanging frost. The ice cliffs towered in silent grandeur, their surfaces etched with layers of ancient winters compressed into shining blue-white stone. As the mammoths passed, the air grew colder, touched by the deep chill radiating from the frozen walls. Frost-laden overhangs dipped low enough that the mammoth's long wool brushed against them, sending tiny shards of ice falling in soft, tinkling cascades. Calves gazed up at the towering cliffs, their reflections faintly visible in the smooth surfaces, warped like shifting memories. The herd walked in a quiet corridor of frozen time, each breath rising as a pale cloud that lingered against the icy expanse. Sound seemed to soften here, absorbed by the vast walls on either side, turning each step into a muted echo. Light refracted through the ice, creating subtle glimmers that danced along the cliff face as the mammoths moved. The towering presence of the cliffs felt ancient and patient, watching their passage with frozen calm. She guided them with subtle motions. Her presence alone was enough. The matriarch moved with effortless authority, every shift of her body communicating direction, reassurance, and quiet wisdom. A slight turn of her head signaled a change in path. A soft rumble from deep in her chest encouraged the younger mammoths to stay close. Her steps were measured, steady, and deliberate, shaped by seasons of instinct and memory. Calves watched her carefully, learning the language of movement and stillness that guided the herd through icy plains and shifting weather. Even the adults responded to her gentle cues, adjusting their positions and pace with ease. Snow brushed softly against her thick wool, clinging to the long strands like fine dust. She carried the calm certainty of one who had survived many winters, her presence forming an unspoken shelter for the entire group. With her at the front, the herd felt no urgency, only the steady comfort of knowing they were led by experience as deep as the land itself. Crusts shattered softly beneath their feet. The sound echoed faintly across the plain. Each step broke through the thin layer of frozen snow, releasing delicate crackling whispers that drifted through the still air. The mammoths moved with slow, deliberate weight, their wide feet pressing into the crust until it yielded with gentle resistance. Beneath the surface, softer snow accepted them easily, molding to their steps. Calves trotted carefully beside the adults, their lighter bodies creating smaller, quicker crackles that blended into the rhythmic soundscape. The echoes traveled outward, bouncing lightly off distant ridges before fading into silence once more. Snowflakes that clung to the crust lifted briefly with each break, swirling into small puffs. Before drifting back to the ground, the herd continued forward, accompanied by these subtle, satisfying sounds, a winter music created simply by moving through the world. And with each step, the land recorded their journey in softened echoes, fading almost as soon as they formed. A gentler breeze brought promise of food. They shifted their path almost imperceptibly. The faint scent drifted across the cold air like a whisper, subtle but unmistakable to the mammoth's keen sense of smell. The herd paused for a moment, lifting their trunks in unison to read the breeze that carried hints of dry grasses hidden beneath snow, or perhaps a sheltered patch of ground warmed slightly by the sun. With a quiet collective understanding, they angled their steps toward the scent, their movements smooth and unified. The calves followed closely, guided both by instinct and by the confident strides of the adults. The breeze wrapped around their wool, stirring loose strands that fluttered softly in its mild warmth. As they continued on this newly chosen path, the landscape shifted slightly. Small rises, gentler slopes, and subtle dips that hinted at sheltered places where life still persisted beneath winter's grip. The promise in the air felt like a soft pull, encouraging their steady, hopeful advance across the frozen land. Evening colors clung to their coats. The mammoths glowed like moving hearths. The low sun washed the steppe in warm hues of orange, rose, and amber, each color settling gently onto the mammoth's wool until they shone with a soft, radiant warmth. Their massive forms carried the light like embers, walking across the snow, glowing despite the cold that pressed in from every side. Calves leaned against the adults, soaking in both the warmth of the herd and the golden light that wrapped around them. Shadows stretched long and fluid across the ground, merging with the deepening twilight. The snow reflected the sunset's glow, creating a shimmering path that the mammoths followed with calm, steady steps. As the sun dipped lower, the colors deepened into richer tones, blending seamlessly with the approaching blue of dusk. The mammoths moved like quiet lanterns across the winter field, their wool alight with the final warmth of the day. The sky deepened into night. Tiny lights appeared above their shapes. Stars flickered into view one by one, scattering themselves across the darkening dome like small, ancient fires rekindled. The mammoths moved beneath them in slow formation, their silhouettes growing darker as the last hints of twilight dissolved into shadow. Calves gazed upward, their eyes wide as the first stars shimmered above their backs, reflecting softly in their dark pupils. The herd's breath rose into the cooling air, drifting upward as pale clouds that momentarily blurred the emerging constellations. Night settled gently around them, bringing with it a quiet that felt deeper than the silence of day. The world contracted into soft darkness, illuminated only by the pinpricks of celestial light above. As the mammoths continued forward, the stars seemed to follow, gleaming faintly along the curve of the sky, as if accompanying them across the frozen plain. They folded into the snow with slow ease. The land cradled them in cold stillness. One by one, the mammoths lowered their massive bodies into the soft drifts, creating shallow impressions that held their warmth. The snow rose around them, cushioning their weight and muffling the sounds of settling, turning even their quiet sighs into faint whispers. Calves nestled close to the adults, tucking their small bodies into the warm hollows formed by wool and snow. The herd grew still as the last traces of daylight faded, their breaths rising in slow, rhythmic clouds that hovered above them before dissolving into the night air. The earth beneath them felt solid and ancient, holding their weight, as though accustomed to the long rest of creatures who had walked its surface for thousands of years. In that moment of settling, the world seemed to pause, embracing the herd in silence as they drifted towards sleep beneath the wide, star-filled sky. Sunlight fractured along the frozen ground. The mammoths rose in quiet unison. The morning light scattered across the ice in bright shards, turning the steppe into a shimmering mosaic that reflected every slow movement. As the herd lifted their bodies from the snow, soft particles clung to their wool, catching the sun in tiny bursts of brilliance. Their warm breath drifted upward in pale clouds, illuminated briefly before fading into the crisp air. The calves rose last, blinking at the sudden brightness and stretching their small limbs against the cold. The frozen ground beneath them sparkled like broken glass, each piece glinting beneath their heavy steps. The herd moved together with a calm rhythm, guided by the warmth of dawn that cut gently through the lingering night. The light felt fragile yet hopeful, a soft reminder that even the coldest mornings held moments of quiet beauty that unfolded slowly across the land. Their line curved gracefully across the land. Frost shimmered beneath each step. The mammoth's path formed a sweeping bow across the frozen plains, a gentle arc shaped by instinct and the subtle contours of the earth. Their bodies moved in steady rhythm, creating a living ribbon that drifted across the shimmering ground. Frost lit up beneath their feet with every careful step, sending flashes of pale light through the thin crystals that coated the snow. Calves followed the curve easily, weaving into the path shaped by the adults. The air felt still and cool around them, carrying the faint metallic scent of morning frost. As they continued toward distant hills, the sun rose behind them, lighting the trail in soft pinks and pale golds. The curve of their line remained unbroken, a graceful sweep that mirrored the arc of the horizon and the quiet flow of winter's breath. White fog pooled near their trunks. It drifted upward like soft incense. Their breath rose in warm waves, coiling gently through the cold air before unraveling into faint wisps that lingered momentarily above them. Each exhale created a small cloud that swirled in delicate spirals, moving with a slow, hypnotic grace. The calves breathed in shorter bursts, their tiny clouds rising quickly and dissolving into the taller patterns drifting above. The cold deepened the outlines of each breath, holding them suspended before letting them fade into the silent morning. The herd moved through their own mist, the fog weaving around their wool and drifting along the ground in thin layers. In the soft light, each breath looked like a quiet offering to the winter sky, a gentle, ephemeral reminder of life warming the frozen world. A faint breeze moved through their coats. It carried the scent of faraway grasses. The long strands of wool rippled in soft waves as the air brushed past them, stirring memories embedded deep within instinct. The scent arrived like a whisper, subtle, distant, but unmistakably alive. The mammoths lifted their trunks slowly, reading the drifting aroma with practiced ease. Calves mimicked the gesture, though their movements were smaller, more tentative. The breeze carried hints of places yet unseen, valleys where snow lay thinner or where dormant grasses waited beneath frost. It stirred their ancient sense of direction, shifting their steady pace toward hope held in scent alone. The wool along their sides swayed gently, catching the light as it moved. Though the breeze was mild, it felt like a guide, a soft pull leading them deeper into the frozen world with quiet promise. Their trail stretched into the distance. Each mark felt like a quiet signature of time. The footprints formed a long, steady line across the snow, preserved in crisp detail by the chilled air. The herd's passage left a gentle, rhythmic pattern stamped into the frozen land, each print a moment held briefly before winter slowly softened its edges. Calves stepped into the larger impressions, their small feet deepening the marks with playful certainty. The wind brushed lightly across the trail, carrying fine snowflakes that drifted into the hollows, adding delicate layers of white. From a distance, the footprints appeared like a slow-moving script, a record of movement through the vast emptiness of the steppe. The mammoths did not look back, but the land remembered their presence in this quiet trail extending toward the horizon. And as they continued forward, the prints behind them faded gently into the silent winter. Fresh flakes descended over the steppe. The mammoths continued, unhurried. Snow thickened the air with soft, white murmurs, drifting in gentle spirals that collected on wool and tusks. The herd moved through the snowfall like shadows gliding beneath a pale curtain, their steps slow and steady, as if honoring the quiet deepening around them. Calves blinked as flakes gathered on their lashes, shaking their heads lightly before settling back into the calm rhythm of the group. The snowfall softened the world into a seamless blend of white, blurring the horizon and smoothing the contours of the land. Each step pressed new prints into the accumulating snow, only for fresh flakes to begin filling them moments later. The mammoths walked with the patience of creatures accustomed to the long winters, their bodies warm against the endless cold. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the landscape as the herd moved through it with unwavering ease. Its ears twitched at each deep call. The sounds guided it like lullabies. The calf lifted its head every time a low rumble rippled through the air, recognizing the familiar vibrations of its elders' voices. Each call carried warmth and reassurance, drifting across the snowy ground with a softness that soothed even the coldest wind. The calf leaned closer to the adults, listening to the subtle variations in tone that signaled direction, comfort, or simple presence. Snow fell gently around them, muffling the world into peaceful quiet, making the rumbles feel even deeper and more comforting. The calf responded with small, uncertain murmurs of its own, practicing the ancient language passed down through generations. Each sound wrapped around it like a soft blanket, guiding its steps, calming its breath, and ensuring it never felt alone In the vast winter world, twilight washed over their shapes, the world dimmed into peaceful shadow. Hints of blue and violet settled across the snow, blending the herd into the quiet dusk, as if they were becoming part of the land itself. The mammoth's wool absorbed the fading light, turning them into soft silhouettes moving through the growing dark. Calves pressed closer, comforted by the warmth radiating from the adults. As the temperature dipped with the encroaching night, the sky carried the last streaks of day like faint brush strokes, slowly fading until only a muted glow remained along the horizon. Snow reflected the twilight in soft, cool tones, smoothing the landscape into gentle contours that invited calm. The herd continued forward with slow, steady steps, guided by instinct and the gradual settling of night. Everything around them softened, quieted, and settled into the blue peace of evening. Their steps slowed as darkness gathered. Rest became the only destination. The weight of the day drifted from their bodies with each passing moment, replaced by the quiet pull of stillness. The mammoths moved across the dimming landscape with unhurried grace, their silhouettes merging into the deepening night. Calves stumbled slightly in their drowsiness, leaning into the warmth of nearby adults who steadied them with gentle nudges. The world around them shifted into shadow, the last hints of light slipping behind distant ridges. Snow cooled beneath their feet, its surface smooth and untouched in the fading glow. As fatigue settled into their muscles, the herd sought a place where the land dipped gently, offering shelter from the night wind. Their breathing deepened, each exhale slow and calm. The journey for now paused, not ended, but simply resting beneath the patient dark. They settled together beneath the night sky. The universe above them glowed in silent, ancient peace. Stars shimmered with cold brilliance, scattering their light across the snow in faint, silver patterns that traced the curves of the resting herd. The mammoths folded into the softness of the ground, forming a warm cluster that breathed steadily into the quiet night. Calves nestled into the center, surrounded by the slow rise and fall of massive bodies that radiated comfort. Above them, constellations turned with the measured rhythm of time, their distant glow offering a calm that seemed to seep into the stillness below. The cold air wrapped around the herd, but their warmth created a gentle halo of breath rising in pale clouds. The night stretched wide and calm, holding them in its vast embrace. Beneath the stars, the mammoths rested, silent, ancient beings carried forward by the same universe that shimmered above their peaceful forms.